Marvel Snap dropped 4 cards. All of them are move related and all of them go together. Typically, I do a video on the newest card, but it's borderline impossible to talk about Hydra Stomper without also talking about Batroc the Leaper, Fonfeay, and Topaz. So we're going to be talking about all of them because each of them informs the existence and the context that the others exist in. This is a very unique week in Marvel Snap history. Let's jump right in. Hydra Stomper is a 3/2 with an ongoing ability that gives it +1 power for every time one of your cards moves in the game that you're playing. There are a couple really obvious cards that go with this. The first of them is Silk, who is a card that really has not been seen in a very long time. And the second of them is Sam Wilson. Now, the way a lot of Hydra Stomper decks are building is they're playing Silk and Sam Wilson as these 2-cost enablers, and then they're playing the new card, Batroc the Leaper, to give even more points to this card, to your Craven, and to Batroc himself. After a little bit of playing with Batroc, what I can say is that he does intensify the nut draws of every deck that is playing him, although I'm not sure that it's actually worth including the Silk stuff in it. But what I can tell you is when you have a Sam Wilson and you have a Craven, or even just a Sam Wilson, this guy gets enormous, and he gets enormous very easily. There's a lot of incidental move. There's not just Sam Wilson and Silk, there's also the move stuff that can happen because of locations, cards like Madam Web, cards that are enabling you to move in ways like the cards you get off of Kate Bishop. This is a very good card. I do think that based on last video, I think I was too high on it though, because it is really requiring stuff of you. This is a card that really fills up your deck it's a good 1-drop. It's a great 1-drop even, but it is still a 1-drop. It's reliant on green power, and it's not like it's catching people all that much by surprise. This is a powerful card, and the one that I think has made the most immediate impact, but I also think that people, myself included, might have overrated exactly how good this card is. Fonfeay is likely the least played of these new cards, but she is a sort of obvious inclusion if you're going to be trying to do non-Scream Hydra Stomper. A lot of people have been jumping straight to Scream with Hydra Stomper in large part because it's already a very good deck, it already plays Sam and Craven, and so it's just a pretty easy thing to actually make it work. I will say that I am not overly convinced that Batroc Hydra Stomper Silk stuff is the direction for Scream. I can be convinced that Batroc is, but I still think the jury is genuinely out on figuring out if this whole new package is actually worth getting in the deck. Fonfeay is much more of a traditional move card, although she does represent multiple procs on a Hydra Stomper. What you're much more likely to be using her for is a sort of small Heimdall, sending things away. Maybe you can even get them to be sent away in a Hercules lane, things like that. This is a card that goes much more with Dagger and Vulture and Madam Web and Human Torch than it does with the typical good stuff mid-range lists. Topaz is another card that has an extremely powerful line of text, but I think it might take a little bit for people to figure out exactly how to play her. There are some obvious play lines, right? Like you play her and then she enables you to do a bunch of moves on the final turns of the game. Like, this is a card that if you bounce it, you can be incredibly surprising with. Topaz into a Vulture, then you Ghost Spider the Topaz lane, that kind of stuff. Like, there's just a lot of additional points here. I think the thing that holds this card back relative to Madam Web is just the 3 cost compared to the 2 cost. Both of them represent sort of an investment that allows you to get free procs of your moves, and that is the best possible thing to do with your move cards because your move cards are so clearly balanced around a 1-to-1 exchange. Move cards like Vulture and Human Torch and Dagger that have been in the game the entire time are balanced around you have to expend a card in order to move these, which is why cards like Madam Web and Topaz are so valuable because they represent multiple moves in only one card. I think this one is a card that I have my eye on pretty squarely. Batroc was originally the one that was like, all right, this is going to be like obviously good. But having played enough of him, I don't necessarily think that he's a wow, that's incredible kind of card. I think maybe people are overbuilding for Hydra Stomper right now. I personally was not impressed with a ton of the Scream lists. That said, that doesn't mean that Topaz will live up to her potential. I just think it should be paid attention to. So with that in mind, let's take a look at some of these decks. This is the deck I think you're probably going to see the most of with a Hydra Stomper or a Batroc in it. And I gotta tell you, when I played it, it's not like it was unimpressive, but it did feel like it was unfinished or just sort of awkward. And I think a lot of that is down to having having Silk in this deck. Like, I don't want to overstate my case here, but Silk is one of the worst cards in this game. And the fact that we're running her to enable this stuff is like genuinely a little bit offensive to me. Every time I played her, I was like, wow, this sucks. Your curve is also really, really low, which can leave you without massively impactful endgame stuff unless your Shang-Chi is on. Like, a lot of the time, you're going to be playing a bunch of cards, and then your hand's going to be Cannonball Shang-Chi or whatever, and it's going to be turn 5, and you're going to be like, I don't actually have a card I can play this turn because my hand is like Cannonball Shang-Chi. I think there's some construction issues here where I would not be surprised if the Hydra Stomper ended up suboptimal, if the Silk ended up suboptimal, because when I did play Hydra Stomper with the Silk, it's like, all right, so this is getting to like, 9 power or whatever in this deck. It's not like amazing, but if like you have your Sam Wilson, you have your Silk, it's getting to like 9 power. None of that is actually worth doing what you're doing by putting Silk in your deck. Like, there are some really cool things that this card can do. The Silk is a second Batroc enabler, for example, but having to run those cards in order to make your other cards good is just not what I like doing. This is a deck that has a bunch of cool stuff going on. It's very complex. It's genuinely hard to play. And the nut draws are legitimately insane, right? Like, if you have that Sam and you have that Craven and you have that Batroc, suddenly your Sam moves the shield to the Craven lane. It drags a Batroc with it. You get 2 Craven procs. You get a Batroc proc. Then the Sam goes back to the shield. You get back to his own lane. You get the shield proc. You get a Batroc proc. You keep repeating that. You get some really big ass numbers in this deck from some really small cards, but I don't think it's sort of figured out what to do with that. It hasn't fully figured out how to apply those big ass numbers from small cards towards winning games. I think the biggest problem this deck has is just point ceiling stuff, where like you are getting really good rate, but you don't have necessarily the point ceiling to compete with, like, I don't know, a Thanos with all the stones on the board that's just like 22, and it's just like, oh, that's just kind of a lot for this deck to actually look at. You have all these rate monsters, but you got to figure out how to like sort of scale into the late game too. I messed around with a ton of different versions of just like, what does an actual Scream Batroc deck look like? Because I am just not convinced by this Silk stuff. I'm not convinced by the Hydra Stomper stuff. The more I played that stuff, the more I was like, I just don't want those cards in my deck. And then I saw this list from Smiles, which I think is pretty close to where I want to be with Scream, which is to say, we've got our Juggernaut slate, we've got just the Batroc of the new cards, because that is a card that is actually excellent. The Kingpin here, I don't think is a long-term resident. I would describe that as a flex slot. You're going to see a pretty decent amount of Kingpin running through these first few days, in large part because they just made 4 move cards. There's a lot of people playing move, and Kingpin is pretty obviously good against that, but I'm not sure he's gonna be here forever. This is a card that I could very easily see leaving, maybe in favor of a Hydra Bob or some other card that like pairs well with a turn 6 5-drop kind of deal. I'm not sure he's a permanent resident. He's there right now. The rest of this, I think, is roughly the shape that we want to be in. But the thing that Scream lost by gaining Batroc is space in the deck, right? Like, I know that sounds pithy, but we used to be able to, like, fully hybridize this deck with, like, the Darkhawk deck. And now it is 1 slot harder to do that because we're getting Batroc in here. and it becomes almost impossible to hybridize with anything if we're trying the Silk stuff and we're trying the Hydra Stomper stuff. And so I think ultimately that this is sort of what generic version of this looks like. I wouldn't be shocked if maybe like Kingpin went out for Arrow or whatever, things of that nature. But I think this is as close as I can get to just Batroc Scream. Moving on to the Fonfeay Hydra Stomper Batroc overlap. What I like about this deck is that it's effectively like, you don't look like it's like, oh, it's the mid-range deck doing the mid-range things, but it is the mid-range deck doing the mid-range things. It's cute. There's some really cute things going on here. There's like, you have your Batroc scaling up, you have your Kraven scaling up, you have all of that nut draw here, the Sam Wilson Batroc Kraven, but you also have Madam Web, who is a scaler that scales your Batroc too. There's just a bunch of cool stuff going on here, and this is crucial. You don't have to play Silk to get that second 2-drop scaler that can help start scaling that Batroc up, because Madam Web can do that. Downsides, the card Red Guardian on your Madam Web really sucks. This is a very difficult deck to actually play correctly. Everyone knows that Heimdall into lose is like a true combo, and you can definitely outthink yourself with like Heimdalls and Fonfeys on the final turn of the game. But I like that this is an attempt at like, what I described it in the deck title is like reverse Scream. This is like a deck that is a Scream deck in ethos, where it's just like, look at all my scalers, but it's doing it the other way by moving its own cards. And I think that that's just like a really fun thing to exist. Keep an eye on this space, because I'm not sure this is exactly perfect. I'm not sure what's going on exactly. Like, we still are playing Silk, you know what I mean? Even though we don't have to play the Silk card, I really do hate her. Like, that's going to be one of the things that you notice about this video, is every time there's a Silk in a deck, I'm like, I really don't want to put that card on the board. And so I think there's likely to be room to optimize this. Maybe we take out the Silk and we take out the Hydra Stomper, we get an Alioth and a Cosmo in there, and suddenly we're starting to look like some really scary old school mid-rangey move decks. Like, I think this is a very interesting shell that for right now maybe leaned too far into the new cards and should dial it back a little bit to get some interaction. Now, I don't know if you guys were aware of this, but did you know that Topaz cost 3, and thus we are legally obligated to try her in a Surfer deck? This one is from Ica. What I really like about this is how you can just do absolutely monstrous stuff in extremely unexpected ways. Like, if you have a Topaz on the board, and you have a Galacta on the board, you can just play a freaking Human Torch, and it'll go to 10 off the Topaz. Then maybe there's a Hercules in the middle. That's 20. That's just like an astonishing amount of power out of absolutely nowhere. And so you have this sort of generally decent points package in the form of the Surfer stuff. You're not giving up too much. You're still Galacting some Broods. You're playing your 3s. You're playing your Surfers. And then you just have like, oh, here's 42 points of Human Torch. Good luck. Like, that's a really powerful thing to have and to be able to catch people off guard with. And I do think that, like, this kind of stuff, the attempts at using the move stuff with Topaz and Madam Web and a couple of the movers as a package, is a really interesting direction for this stuff to go. I like that it's not playing Silk. Probably the 4th time I've said that in this video. But yeah, this is a really genuinely unique approach to what is swiftly potentially becoming a splashable, or at least hybridizable package with the addition of Topaz. The one thing that makes Topaz a little bit awkward in this deck is that she costs 3. Move Bounce is a deck that needs a lot of setup to actually work, but this is also a deck that has been really begging for a 12th card for a really long time. The fact that this card costs 3 is pretty awkward for this deck, because it's not just a 3-cost card, it's a 3-cost card that you want to get down and use as an engine as much as you possibly can. And that is kind of a difficult thing to do some of the time. The other upside, though, is that this is effectively like a second Madam Web for this deck. This is obviously one of the hardest decks in the game to play, just on a technical level, but also on a level where even beyond the technical skill, There are so many turn 6 reads that you have to make when you want to play this deck. It's a very, 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 very tough deck to play. But I would be utterly unsurprised if this deck was a deck that at the top end of Infinite ended up being a real problem. Right now, one of the few things that's keeping it down is just how many people are playing the new cards in Scream Shells. If that starts to die down, I think this deck has a real shot. The other thing that has a real chance at keeping it down is various iterations of Cosmo being all over Thanos decks. Thanos has a lot of useful interaction between Cosmo and Red Guardian, typically, that can make this deck fall apart very easily. But I really do think that there might genuinely be something here. Move Bounce has been crying out for card number 12. We've tried Hulkbuster, we've tried Sage. I do feel like there is a very real chance that Topaz is that card in the long term. So what's the verdict on all of these cards? I am generally unexcited by Hydra Stomper. Hydra Stomper is a unique card, an interesting card, but every time I think about what I have to do to justify it, I kind of get the jitters. I don't think there's a lot that's actually worth putting Silk in your deck, especially if other people are playing Scream and Batroc. It can be a real liability if you're trying to do that. As far as Batroc, I think he is sort of as advertised, a very solid card. Like, this is like an 8 to 10 power 1 cost, depending on what you're doing with him. Just a solid card, great in Scream decks that are just going to be able to get a couple procs of him. Just very, very good. It does sort of preclude you from running Killmonger in those decks, which is relevant. Like, you do care about that. It does make the deck a little bit harder to hybridize. Also relevant. You do care about that. But he seems like a card that I think I would lean towards likely being in a lot of those decks in the future, unlike something like Hydra Stomper currently. As far as Fonfeay, I think she's probably the weakest of these cards, but her stat line and her ability are very interesting if people can figure out a normal move mid-range style deck for her to be in. Topaz is actually the card I am the most scared of right now because I think we all know, if you've been watching me long enough, exactly how I feel about all this move bounce crap, and she really does seem like she probably goes in there. I'm hopeful that we have enough tools to deal with that stuff now. I'm not overly optimistic on it, but there are plenty of worlds where Topaz does not become an actual problem, or the move bounce does not become an actual problem due to her influence. She's the card I'm the most scared of. Batroc is probably the safest pickup. Hydra Stomper, I'm pretty ambivalent on. Like, I was not impressed with him, and I don't want to put Silk in my decks, but he was playing for like 3-9, 3-10 some of the time. Like, I think speed is maybe the comp. It's just speed is asking so much less of you that it's hard for me to justify the Hydra Stomper unless you're like hyper invested in it and you're getting him to like 15 or something, which is possible, right? Like, if you have your Sam and your Batroc, you're getting, multiple procs every turn, and you do like a Heimdall too. It's possible. But I think ultimately he's an archetype role player at best, where Fonfeay ends up in a slightly lower archetype role player kind of description from me. So if you ask me to stack rank them, Batroc, Topaz, and then Hydra Stomper, Fonfeay is sort of where my head is at right now. I'm not positive, obviously. This is a pretty inbred metagame because they released 4 move cards, so everyone's just playing a bunch of move stuff and then playing a bunch of Scream stuff. So there's plenty of time for these cards to develop, but I do think that that's where my head is at right now. I hope that was useful for y'all. Tomorrow, we are going to dive into Thanos Ongoing, which after I got tired of playing a bunch of move mirrors, I just switched to that. It absolutely crushed. So look forward to a Thanos Ongoing guide tomorrow. And of course, if you're watching this is Wednesday, make sure you check out the Penny Arcade stream on Twitch. I will be guesting on it at 4:30 Eastern and giving away some of the new Penny Arcade special codes that give you bundles in the game for exclusive card backs and avatars and titles and stuff like that. So please do check that out, twitch.tv/pennyarcade. 4:30 Eastern on Wednesday. I will be there. I mean, I guess the stream starts at 3:30 Eastern, but I show up at 4:30 Eastern. So, that's when the cool kids are going to show up. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. I've been KMBest. You've been phenomenal. I will see you in the next one.